What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Off the Top Rope, Off the Mic Sports Network. Coming off the back of SummerSlam Saturday, we're halfway through the first ever two-day SummerSlam, the 38th edition, biggest party of the summer. And obviously, the big talking point coming out of Saturday is Seth Rollins is the new World Heavyweight Champion. He cashes in Money in the Bank, essentially feigning a knee injury, working us all, and cashing in on CM Punk, ruining CM Punk's moment of winning his first world championship in 12 years. And ultimately, he is the new world heavyweight champion. Really a masterclass of a work. And I tried to tell you guys that this was what was going on, but they executed it to perfection. A lot of things had to go completely right for them to make this happen. And even some people who thought that this was going to happen, this was done flawlessly, because even the people that knew what was going on were like, man, this is going to be epic if they actually pull this off. And they did. So I give them credit for that. But one thing that I've been thinking about in the aftermath of, this cash, and I did a video right after it. I said something on there where I was like, okay, this was never going to top Rollins' initial cash in 10 years ago at WrestleMania 31. And I started thinking about that in the immediate aftermath of doing that video and, reviewing and analyzing what happened at SummerSlam over the course of the 3+ hours that we had on Saturday. And I started to think to myself, is the Ruse of the century better than the Heist of the century? So is the sequel, like we often talk about with movies, is the sequel better than the original? So let's break this down here for a second, because also you guys can hit me with comments and also get at me on social media to let me know what you think is the better cash. Because like I said, Naomi's cash-in at Evolution a few weeks ago was pretty damn great. But let's compare these Seth Rollins cash-ins, because, Edge had 2 cash-ins, CM Punk had 2 cash-ins, and now Rollins now has 2 cash-ins, and Miz had 2 cash-ins. So I think we've had 4, if memory serves me correctly, I think there's only been 4 double cash-ins in the history of careers in WWE. And they've all been men. There hasn't been a double women's Money in the Bank briefcase holder. So with Rollins, it's different, because these are 2 of the greatest cash-ins of all time in my eyes. But let's compare these side by side, and let's try and break this down for a second here. So if you look back to 2015, Rollins was really an up-and-coming star. He hadn't won a world championship. He was the next big thing in the Authority, and it seemed like, he was being groomed to do something big. And I think the real reason why everybody considers the Heist of the century the greatest cash-in of all time is because it was the first time in the history of that stipulation, which dated back 10 years, all the way back to 2005 when they did it at WrestleMania. That was the first time that they ever did it at a WrestleMania. Now they've done it a second time, which ironically weaved its way into the story of what this cash-in is. What was beautiful about, this one, and I mentioned this on my post after the whole thing went down, is this was some of the best elements of 31 and 40 woven together into one cash-in. And, that's what kind of makes this really a fascinating discussion to talk about. But yeah, I think really, if you look back to 2015, the situation they were in a no-win situation in that WrestleMania main event. Roman Reigns was not well liked. Brock Lesnar seemingly was on his way out, but then he wasn't, and he re-signed. So they were in a situation where they were like, okay, do the people want Brock to win? That's a heel. Do we want to keep the title on Brock? Do we want Roman to win and get booed out of the building? And then, as reports said, they didn't decide until the day of. I think it might have been, at some point during the show, WrestleMania 31, that Vince McMahon made the decision to have Seth Rollins cash in the Money in the Bank briefcase to close the show. And it was an all-time moment. I remember watching it with one of my friends, and we went crazy watching this. It was an all-time moment. And, you're never going to have another first at WrestleMania. So I totally understand why people are going to honestly say in this argument, Heist of the century beats Ruse of the century. So I totally get that. But let me explain why there is a compelling argument and why, in some ways, I'm kind of starting to lean towards this one. And maybe it's some recency bias. Who knows? But let's think about this. This has been a decades-long story between CM Punk and Seth Rollins. It's been playing out in real time. Some people don't like it. I think there's a ton of story here. This has literally been like, a bunch of layers to this story. These guys have a lot of parallels within their careers. Rollins, was kind of mentored by CM Punk back in the day. There's a lot of layers to this whole thing. And then obviously, like I said, there is more layers to this that go into, hey, this was supposed to be the match at WrestleMania 40 before CM Punk got hurt. It led to Drew McIntyre sliding into that spot, and it led to the Damian Priest cash-in, which became the second Money in the Bank cash-in at WrestleMania. The peeling back of somebody on the announce table, which happened in the match, but it wasn't near that. 5 minutes of holding the championship. In a lot of ways, it's karma to CM Punk. Some people were sheepishly making a joke, like Matt Hardy made a joke about, hey, this is revenge for Jeff Hardy. I saw a bunch of people saying that. So this is karma for a lot of people, and some AEW people will be schmucks about it. But this is karma for all the wrongs of what CM Punk has done, including that moment at WrestleMania 40, because Drew McIntyre is going to feel wronged about that, and he's going to feel great that Punk got screwed over in his biggest moment of his career since he came back to WWE. So the story, if you compare it side by side, the story, there was no story. Like, yeah, Roman and Seth had a history from the Shield, and that was there. But there was really no story or no rhyme or reason to why this cash-in happened at WrestleMania 31 in 2015. It was just, hey, we have a get-out-of-jail-free card, which is what Money in the Bank was in booking. And, hey, let's just do it for shock and awe, and let's have a great moment to end WrestleMania unlike any way that we ever have. And let's go off the air in an incredible way. And they did. And that was the essence of a Money in the Bank cash-in really back in the day. It was all about shock and awe. With this one, it's different because, like I said, the story is there. The karma is there. And then you get into the new layer of this whole thing where Seth Rollins, in a reality-based world, found a way to work the WWE audience. And whether and it's a combination of him, Triple H, whoever was wired in, maybe LA Knight, because he was involved in that angle. CM Punk has probably got to be involved in this too and had to agree to it as well. Because as you guys saw with WWE Unreal, it's clear as day that Punk and, Rollins, not outside the realms of kayfabe, they have a healthy respect for each other. They understand that this is business. And so to add to the story that they've been telling, they had Seth feign a knee injury to get himself out of television. And, obviously Becky Lynch played a role in this. And, it all led to the moment at the end where CM Punk is celebrating the ring, burn it down, blares over the, blares it through the stadium at MetLife in New Jersey. Everybody goes fucking crazy. Seth comes out on crutches with Paul Heyman and that briefcase. And Paul Heyman also a part of this as well because of his affiliation with CM Punk and him backstabbing him back at WrestleMania, which leads to even more layers to this story. And then it seems like, hey, Michael Cole says, yeah, they got until June to cash this in. Yeah, Seth Rollins, and seemingly hinting that Seth Rollins is not okay. And then Seth turns around. And in maybe one of the more iconic visuals, because everybody, here's the other thing. Another thing that people will talk about when you talk about the 2015 cash-in is that iconic visual of Seth just racing down the ramp at WrestleMania. I think we've got a new image that's going to stand the test of time. And this is what we talk about when we compare these two cash-ins is Seth Rollins turning around with his back to the ring and then just shoving the crutches aside was just an unbelievable visual. Guy looked like freaking God and just in so controlled. Like he literally, that was the moment of like, man, what a fucking genius this guy is. Turns around, zips off his brace, takes off his shirt, takes off his jacket, races down to the ring. And then, we get a little bit of a schmoz and then ultimately the bell rings and in 10 seconds, he's the world heavyweight champion. But the execution and the story that went into the ruse of the century, you can make a very compelling argument. And honestly, I'm kind of leaning that direction that the sequel was better than the original because they had an incredibly tough battle to fight once Seth got that briefcase. They had a tough battle. I talked about this when I was basically, I told you guys, I told you so in that video that you can go watch on the channel. It's like they had an impossible position. It's like, how do we try to top or even top, dare I say, what happened at WrestleMania 31? Because obviously there's no other way. Like, listen, it's first ever WrestleMania cash-in. You're doing it on Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns. It's a shocking moment. It's the first world championship win for Seth Rollins. Like it's one of those things that's going to stand the test of time in wrestling. And a lot of people will look at that as the better cash-in. But if you really dig deep into a lot of these things, like in terms of story, like the element of karma, all the things that have gone through, obviously the story with CM Punk and Seth Rollins, and then of course the big elephant in the room, the injury angle, which some people thought was legitimately real. Becky Lynch is involved in it. There's a bunch of people for 3 weeks, listen, some people legitimately thought he was hurt. For a second there, I did. And then you broke it down and you're like, man. So, and for them to execute an angle like that in 2025 is incredible. So all the work that went in, all the story, all these things, we'll see how the payoff is, because that's the other thing. The follow-up to, Seth Rollins, it was just, there was nothing really to it in terms of like, paying off a story. Like it was just, hey, Seth won the championship, cool moment. And then he got a decent world championship run out of it. How's this going to look? Because now you got CM Punk chasing him, LA Knight. People are mad about how LA Knight got screwed. Do you guys really think LA Knight's going to get screwed? The guy won a match against the world heavyweight champion, so that's on the table. You've obviously got Seth Riders. Maybe this gives some new energy to that group. So we still have to see how this also plays out as well down the road. And that's where I think maybe this might lead this cash-in to be more impactful than the one at WrestleMania 31. So, listen, to me, it even though some people knew that this was happening, it still was an unbelievable moment. Some of the visuals it provided, the crowd reaction that it got in the stadium at MetLife. It's just, listen, this is going to be an argument that's going to be had for years to come in my eyes, because, these are two of the biggest moments of Seth Rollins' entire career. In my eyes, it absolutely, SummerSlam in 2025 and then WrestleMania 31 in 2015. The two Money in the Bank cash-ins, like I said, I think there's only 4 guys, if my memory serves me correctly, that have had Money in the Bank cash-ins on 2 separate occasions. There was Edge, there was Miz, there was CM Punk, and now Seth Rollins. So it's one of those things, man, where you're inclined to feel how you want to feel, but the more that I think about this, given everything that is factored into this whole thing leading to this point in the story that could still be told, there's an argument to be made that the sequel was better than the original. The Ruse of the Century is better than the Heist of the Century. So debate it all you want in the comments. Debate it on my social media. The Twitter handles at OffTheMic28, at OTMicSports up there in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. Thanks to everybody who's been subscribing to this channel. The outreach has been unbelievable. We started doing this before SummerSlam last year. Now we're at over 1,700 subscribers. You guys are fucking incredible. One of the best fan bases in the community. I'm obviously biased because you guys support me, but I'm just a guy who talks wrestling in my apartment on a daily basis. And I think it's unbelievable that we get to have these discussions, even if you guys tell me that I'm an idiot. That's the beauty of this, is having this discourse, having this discussion. But we had an all-time moment on Saturday, August the 2nd. And, moving forward, how this gets portrayed on television could really help this moment transcend, really the next handful of years in wrestling. Because to me, like, this was one of those things where it was a special, special moment at MetLife Stadium in East Rutherford. And if you were there, God bless you for being in the building there. If you were there in Santa Clara at Levi Stadium in 2015 for that moment, good for you. You got to see an all-time moment. So Anyway, thanks so much for watching, everybody. I'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.